Hi, my name is Isabel Marshall, and this is my presentation for Political Science 301 Research Methods. Of course, this is phase 3 of the project, and the article that I chose to do my project on is called The Arab American Housing Discrimination, Ethnic Competition, and the Contract Hypothesis. And just to start off with a little background about the study, an interesting approach that the researchers had was to focus on racial bias specifically against Arab women, since most prior research on Arab Americans' radicalization has been focused on men's experiences. Another element that set the study apart from many other ones that exist about bias studies that I've seen is that it studies discrimination and radicalization against Arab women in a housing context rather than the commonly studied economic and career-related discrimination. So first off, with the research question, since September 11, 2001, Arab Americans have been marked as inferior or threatening to many fearful Americans. Based on preconceived notions and ignorance of different cultures and locations, Arab Americans are often conflated into a singular category among Muslim Americans and Americans of Middle Eastern descent. However, the United States Census considers Arab Americans to be white, actually, which essentially erases part of their culture and identity. So it's a really big deal. Even after more than a decade has passed since the 9/11 terrorist attacks, negative perceptions of Arab and Muslim Americans persist today, leading the researchers to question to what degree does the official classification of Arab American as white matches the social boundaries that people draw in everyday behavior. In this article, the authors uncovered the results they found after testing to what extent Arab Americans are treated as white as opposed to being marked as racially others. The hypothesis, the main hypothesis that they use with it throughout their study is the contact hypothesis, and it's based loosely on the developed hypothesis by psychologists Gordon Allport in 1954. The hypothesis suggests that intergroup contact under appropriate conditions can effectively reduce prejudice between majority and minority group members. Essentially, contact between members of different groups can reduce prejudice and conflict between those groups. To test the contact hypothesis, data on the location of mosques and on individuals with Arab ancestry was collected to examine whether neighborhood proximity to Arab Americans and Muslim religious life affected Arab American treatment and their discrimination or lack thereof. So to talk a little bit about the experiment itself, it was a field experiment. To set up the study, the researchers developed racially coded names and email addresses for 4 Arab American female identities with Arab origin names and 4 white-sounding names as the control variables for the experiment, and responded to several hundred roommate wanted advertisements in Detroit, New York City, Houston, Los Angeles areas. All the emails identify the center as a college-educated and employed and are written in grammatically correct English just to make sure that, they didn't discriminate against them because they misspelled something or said something incorrectly. The emails to potential roommates contained identical messages as well. To implement the field experiment, they randomized the order of ads for each and assigned a unique ID to each ad so they can keep track of them. Then they assigned an order for each pair, white and Arab American, so that each profile sent in an email first half of the time and second to the other half of the time. Each email text attempted to remove economic considerations from the response decision by including information about education and employment, as stated above. The different variables are kind of listed here in a kind of a quick to look at format, but just to explain a little bit more deeply, in the experiment, the racially coded names and email addresses for 4 Arab American female identities with Arab origin names and 4 white sending names are the control variables. The independent variables are the locations observed, information about the sender, and the contents of the message sent. The main dependent variables were the number of responses received by each group and if the responses were positive or potentially positive versus negative. The researchers focused only on positive or potentially positive responses to their inquiries, not the negative ones at all. Okay, so the general results are kind of outlaid here with a table with descriptive statistics by metro area, as you can see, and of course, including the total there. The researchers conducted logistic regression analysis predicting odds ratios to find their primary results. Overall, the researchers received at least one reply from 55.4% of ads, with a low of 50.4% in Detroit and a high of 62.6% in New York City. In all 4 US cities, profiles with white sounding names received a statistically significant amount more responses than Arab American sounding names, overall concluding that Arab Americans are only 57 as likely as whites to receive a response to a roommate requested email. Wow. Some location-specific results further is, of course, here's a bar graph showing those percentages compared to each other. In the Detroit area, 43% of whites inquiries received responses, whereas Arab Americans' response rate was 30%, which is a statistically significant difference. According to the researchers, the results are somewhat similar for Houston, 46% to 30% respectively. In Los Angeles, the response rate was much closer. Whites received response rate at 48% compared to just 42% for Arab Americans. Finally, the largest absolute gap, according to New York City, whites received response rates of 54% compared to a very low of just 36% for Arab Americans. So to look specifically at the contact hypothesis, was it true or was it not? The results show that it really wasn't here. The results concerning the contact hypothesis return that there was no significant interaction results for distance to a mosque at the aggregate. Actually, it's actually the exact opposite of neighborhoods closer to mosques in New York City specifically displayed more bias. So that's pretty shocking, I thought. These findings directly negate the original contact hypothesis and prove the opposite to be true. And here's my works cited. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed the class. And have a great rest of the summer and a great fall semester. Thank you so much.